I'm Kelly Sadler, and this is Politically Unstable. This week, we're joined by a senior advisor to former President Trump, Peter Navarro. He held the office of the director of the Office of Trade and Manufacturing when he served in the White House for all 4 years. Peter, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, Kelly, great to be with you. I always want to give a shout out to what you do at the Washington Times. You've managed to develop arguably the best commentary section of any major newspaper in the country. It's an honor to appear on that page once a week, and good for you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And our readers love hearing what you have to say, especially when it comes to Trump's economic policies. So kind of let's dive into that, what another 4 years of Donald Trump would look like, as well as some of the attacks that Kamala Harris is launching on the Trump campaign, namely when it comes to tariffs. And this is a hot button issue, at the Wall Street Journal, at Squawk Box. And they're taking Kamala Harris's line that tariffs are really non-productive for the U.S. economy, that they're a national sales tax, that eventually all of those costs will come back to the U.S. consumer. What say you? I know when you were with Donald Trump in the White House, you were kind of the architect of a lot of Trump's tariff policies.
The essence of Trump trade policy is to level the playing field for American workers and American manufacturers, particularly small manufacturers. And the fundamental problem we face as a country is that we have the lowest tariffs in the world compared to everybody else. And whether it's communist China or Germany, Singapore, Brazil, India, all of these countries have higher tariffs than we do. That's the reality we're dealing with. And when one country has higher tariffs than another, what invariably happens is that the jobs go to the high tariff country. They protect their base. We don't. And so, two things Donald Trump wants to do. The Reciprocal Trade Act is something that I worked on back in 2019 in his State of the Union address. He urged Congress to pass it. Sean Duffy, former congressman now at Fox, was the guy who led the charge on it. But the concept was simply that if a country like India or the EU, including Germany, has a higher tariff on, say, automobiles than we do, which they do, we give them a choice. They either lower their tariffs to our level. If they don't want to do that, we raise ours to their level and thereby level the playing field. It's the most common sense in the world. And if you understand the logic of the Reciprocal Trade Act, you understand why tariffs are necessary. Now, the other function of tariffs for the U.S., the Trump tariffs, is to defend and protect industries against unfair trade practices like dumping, currency manipulation, unfair subsidies from state-owned enterprises, and the like. And communist China, above all, is a country that uses every possible way to screw the American people. And when I say the American people, I mean workers and manufacturers. And so tariffs represent a defense against these unfair trade practices. And President Trump's concept is put on defensive tariffs when you observe this economic aggression like on China, and also a baseline tariff to level this playing field because of the unfair trade out there, okay? Until you get the Reciprocal Trade Act, baseline tariffs is the best way to go. Now, to your question of what's the economic impacts of that, we have a track record on that. The Wall Street Journal, interestingly, you mentioned the Wall Street Journal, Kelly, imagine this. You read the Washington Times. It's like I was in the title of the lead editorial of the Wall Street Journal twice. twice during the Trump administration, warning about what they called the Navarro recession because of the tariffs. And guess what? No recession. Guess what? No inflation. And our lived experience in the Trump administration is when you put tariffs on countries, particularly countries that are heavily export dependent and want to dump goods into your country, they absorb the tariffs by lowering their prices. So the tariffs that Donald Trump wants to impose will do a lot of things. They will protect American workers, they'll protect American manufacturers, they'll raise a ton of money. I mean, they will help pay the debt, they could fund a tax cut. What they won't do is create inflation. And therein lies the debate. And the problem we always have when you have the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, which is kind of the globalist squawk box, if you know the reference there, and basically the legacy media, they're going to all buy into Kamala Harris's description of what tariffs are, but it's just wrong. It's not a sales tax at all.
Well, I mean, one of the things the Biden administration has done is it hasn't repealed Trump's tariffs on China. It's had those, it's held steady on those. But what, I think the problem comes in the debate is across the board, a 20% across the board tariff on all imports. You're talking about the reciprocal, or that seems to make more sense to me. Take country by country, industry by industry, and then match whatever tariff they're putting. But at 20%, why is it 20% across the board?
The problem is that on average, what we face around the world are tariffs that are well more than 20% higher than ours. So it's a good baseline, I think, to start. We tried the Reciprocal Trade Act. We're certainly going to try it again. President Trump wants to pass that, but it takes Congress to do it. Whereas on national security grounds, we can implement baseline tariffs with a stroke of a presidential executive order. And it's sound policy. I mean, it's what we need to do. We're different from every other country in the world in the following sense. This American exceptionalism, to me, means simply we're the biggest market in the world, and we're the biggest market that gets exploited. And because it gets exploited, we lose our manufacturing and defense industrial base. We become weak, and everything becomes unstable around the world. So baseline tariffs make sense. Think of it as a bulwark to defend our manufacturing and defense industrial base. And by the way, we have really got to focus like a laser beam on some of these industries where we are dangerously dependent for foreigners, particularly China and India and others, for product. I mean, our whole medical, all the pharmaceuticals we made, India and China, as we learned during the pandemic, really have us in a very uncomfortable situation. So there's a lot of work to do. Tariffs. The other thing, Kelly, I think this is a really good point economically. If you want industries onshore here, you can use the Biden way, which is government subsidies, which is spending a lot of money we don't have, taxing the American people, and running a budget deficit which drives interest rates up. That's one way of doing it. Or you can do tariffs, and those raise tax revenues, and they're more fiscally responsible. You see what I'm saying? It's like the Biden-Harris approach to when they talk about having domestic jobs here, they're just giving money away, and they usually give it to the wrong people for the wrong reasons. That's the whole problem with the electric vehicle mandate. The way they're giving that money out is funding battery factories in Shanghai.
Well, let's get to that. But to sign off on tariffs, you argue in one of your columns that we import about $4 trillion. annually, and this could raise as much as $800 billion annually for the U.S., and it could fund the entire our U.S. military
Yes, a
within.
year, 800 billion a year.
Yeah, yeah.
That's that's that's
What
a better alternative than what we've got right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you also argue, and if you could just the trickle down of this is you also argue that this would bolster Americans' pay. It'd lead to wage hikes. How does that work through the tariff policy?
Sure, the way you want Americans to increase their wages is to do it in real inflation adjusted terms. And every economist will tell you that in order for that to happen, worker productivity has to increase. And the way that happens in a world of tariffs and onshoring of American production is you get more and more capital investment here within our borders to go with workers, productivity increases, and you get higher real wages. This is really important. If people remember one thing from our discussion here today, Kelly, remember this, because this is the lived experience of Trump. During the Trump administration, real inflation adjusted wages went significantly up. During Biden Harris, they've been flat to fallen, a significant decline. That's extraordinary. Remember, the Democrats for decades have been claiming that they're the party of the working class. And just from a statistical point of view, they're the party that screws the working class. And that was the innovation of the Trump administration. He transformed the Republican Party into the party of Main Street. I mean, I know there's a lot of Wall Street people in the Republican Party who are moaning about that. The Mitch McConnells of this world, the Paul Ryans of this world. But this is what the Trump revolution has been about, and it's not over. And Trump republicanism hasn't been consolidated, and we see a lot of that. I mean, if we had a consolidated Republican Party for Trump over the last couple of years, we would have polling that would look very different right now. But it's the rhinos of this world, the Lincoln projects of this world that create difficulties.
So when Trump left office, inflation was 1.4%. And today we're paying 20% higher prices pretty much across the board,
Yeah.
especially when we go into the grocery store. How did Harris Biden come into office and in 4 years turn an economy that was humming right along into kind of the disaster that it is today? And of Harris's economic proposals, of what we know, her economic opportunity, whatever she talks about, under 4 more years of Harris, who said she's going to continue Biden's, basically, she's in lockstep with everything that Biden did over the last
Yeah.
3.5. Where do you foresee their policies taking us?
Well, let me put on my professor's hat. I got two sleeves here. Okay, so there's two kinds of inflation. I pull this one out. It's called demand pull inflation. It's too much money chasing too few goods. So the way that Kamala Harris created demand pull inflation, and she's directly responsible for this, she was the tie-breaking vote on the two major bills, the ironically named Inflation Reduction Act, and the other one that had to do with pandemic recovery, which have swelled the national debt by 25% in these 4 years. Just those two people alone, Biden and Harris, did that. So passage of those two bills pretty much set in motion this demand pull inflation. That's directly on them. It was overspending, fiscally irresponsible spending on low productive investment. So there's that. Now, out of my other sleeve here, there's something called cost push inflation. And what cost push is, well, you can also call it supply side inflation. So how that happened was through the war on fossil fuels primarily, the war on the energy sector in this country. And when they immediately came, it's interesting, when they came into office, they didn't get rid of the China tariffs. They didn't get rid of the steel and aluminum tariffs. But one of the first things they did was cancel the Keystone Pipeline. I actually wrote an executive order on that. One of the first things I did when I was in the White House. They canceled that. They dramatically restricted any leasing of new federal lands for drilling. They closed ANWR up in up North Pole area, and basically war on fracking in Pennsylvania. They made it very difficult. So what did that do? We've seen a dramatic jump in the price of energy. And when the price of energy goes up, it's just not the cost of transportation. It's not just the cost of heating your home, things like that. It's also the cost of food, because a lot of the fertilizer we use is natural gas derived. And then a lot of the other fertilizer we use, like phosphates, it's very energy intensive to extract. So when Donald Trump says drill baby drill, it's basically synonymous with the first strike against inflation by getting rid of these cost push pressures. I mean, oil prices are dramatically up than from the Trump years, just dramatically up. And that's all on the policies of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And you referenced, I have this report that I released this week, Kamala Harris's policy agenda and the decline of manufacturing and energy in the key battleground states. The op-ed is right on the Washington Times page, came out yesterday. And what I do there is show Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania. I walk through each of those states and show how these misguided policies of Harris have really had a devastating effect. I mean, it's ironic, Kelly. She wants to win a presidential election, and a disproportionate share of the negative effects on jobs has occurred in battlegrounds like Pennsylvania. She's got to win. I mean, fracking employment's down 30% in Pennsylvania. You go out to Arizona, that aluminum extruding industry is under siege because Harris and Biden are letting Mexico and China dump all sorts of aluminum into American markets and evading the tariffs. You go to Michigan, Motor City, the EV mandate is shutting part suppliers down. Kelly, it takes 40% less workers to build an electric vehicle than it does a combustion engine car. And by the way, the jobs are not the same, right? The EV is basically a bunch of metal sitting on a battery. Internal combustion engine is a much more complex machine. And so just at North Carolina, I mean, look, I'm going to North Carolina next week for a big event. It's a special place for me because when I was working my way through graduate school at Harvard there in Cambridge, I managed a small furniture store, and I'd go to North Carolina to buy product at the Furniture Mart in High Point. That used to be the furniture capital of the world. China devastated it, but now Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are devastating it once again with their inflationary policies and this thing I talk about called the de minimis loophole. And it's just a shame. There's a story in the report about this one company in North Carolina, Parkdale Mills, which during the pandemic, Kelly, I worked with this guy, the CEO, Andy Warlick, on getting PPE to the American people, gowns and things like that. And that company was like a rock in terms of providing comfort and aid and support to the American people. And it's shutting down a bunch of its mills because of the policies of Harris and Biden. So people need to know this stuff. And I'm trying to get that out.
No, I mean, and I encourage everyone to go to our site and read your column because it is very informative and it gives specific examples in each of these battleground states of where the Biden Harris agenda has failed the American worker. But one thing, and then this will kind of be my final question. I've got actually one more. But according to Biden Harris, and when she goes out on the stump, they inherited one of the worst economies ever. It was the height of the pandemic, and they're responsible kind of for the rebound. And in terms of GDP, we're one of the healthiest nations worldwide. Kind of what say you to that? Because every time I look at her economic agenda, it just feels like it's just more spending. It's more government handouts, whether it's 50,000, for a new business, but that's a write off. So that I don't understand how that works. You have to be up and running to take a write off, or if it's 25,000 to go purchase it for first time home buyers. Where is this money coming from? Is it, and how will that carry us through the next 4 years if she's reelected?
First of all, inheriting the worst economy, that's yet another Kamala Harris lie. In the midst of the pandemic, when everybody was locked down and businesses, of course, we had depressed economic activity, but like a rubber band, it was going to snap back. It didn't matter who was in office at the time, it was going to snap back. So they can't take credit for any of that snapback. Now, what they've done since is, from again a macroeconomic standpoint, they've engaged in the most ambitious and senseless and fiscally irresponsible type of Keynesian stimulus and overstimulus we've ever seen in our nation's history. Remember, they've added 25%. Our national debt has increased 25% in just their term. I mean, that's mind-boggling. And you ask where the money's coming from? It's coming from the Federal Reserve printing it. It's coming from bonds we're selling and getting into debt. And the problem, I'll be honest with you, Kelly, I mean, like when Donald Trump comes into office, that fiscal cliff's there. I've been warning about it. You've been warning about it. Russ Vought's been warning about it. It's there for everybody to see. And it's going to be very difficult clawing back some of those expenditures, which are not productive, efficient expenditures, in order to make sure that we can reduce that debt. But that's going to be Donald Trump is going to be faced with a lot of challenges. I mean, you can't break something this bad like Kamala Harris has and expect somebody to come in and immediately put it back together with super glue. It's going to be a lot of challenges. That's why you need Trump in there, because he's done it before. He can do it again. We know what Harris has done. She's broken. Mm-hmm. If it's broke, then she can't fix it. That's the funny part. What Trump during the debate, he goes, she never fires anybody. He never fires anybody. It's like
her staff leaves her, though.
if I had those people working for me, they'd all be fired. But she's going to go to the same advisors that got her into the mess to get her out of it. How's that work?
Yeah. So this leads me to my final question. The final question is, what can Donald Trump do on day one? And what would you recommend him doing on day one to try to claw us back from this fiscal cliff and to re-energize American manufacturing and pay? I know that wages have been stagnant for everyone. There has been no growth during this period.
Well, that would be the time for me to put a shameless plug in for my book, The New MAGA Deal. Subtitle is The Unofficial Deplorables Guide to Donald Trump's 2024 Platform. And the reason why I mentioned the New MAGA Deal, it's newmagadeal.com if you want to get it. It's Don Jr.'s publishing house, newmagadeal.com. Go to Amazon. Why do I mention that? That's where to find the answer to your question. It's 100 actions in 100 days. 99 of which will be done by executive order that the president will sign on day one or in week one. And it's going to deal with economic policy. It's going to deal with border security. It's going to deal with foreign policy. It's going to deal with law and order. It's going to deal with all of these woke issues. And there are very specific ways to handle it. I mean, for the border, look, I was there when this happened. I was in the Oval Office when this decision was made to force Mexico to adopt the Remain in Mexico policy. And then we got Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to do a similar thing with a safe third. And we had the border crisis solved. Donald Trump will do that again immediately. And then he'll start mass deportations based on criminal elements. The criminals got to go home, starting probably with the Venezuelan gang members, the Islamic terrorists, and the communist Chinese military officers that are infiltrating this country.
All right. Well, everyone needs to go by the book, myself included, because that's quite a flurry of executive actions on day one. But Peter, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Appreciate what you do at the Washington Times.
We appreciate your contributions.
It's great.
All right. Everyone, have a good day.